Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So, near and dear to all of our hearts, elections. So, we have one this year, which is great. So, earlier today, OGRA held elections to determine which candidates will sit on the 2021 OGRA Board of Directors from the Southwest Zone. So I will now call upon Peter Fay, City Clerk, City of Brampton, and OGRA Returning Officer to announce the results. Peter?
Thank you. Good afternoon, OGRA members and guests. My name is Peter Fay, and I'm the Returning Officer for the OGRA Board of Directors election for this conference. Before announcing the election results, I would like to thank the conference organizers for their cooperation during the election, and specifically thank City of Brampton election staff who supported this election, Roger Wilson, Shauna Danton, and Shauna Hans. I also wish to extend congratulations to both candidates for their campaigns. An election was required for the Southwest Zone this year. The results are as follows. For the Southwest Zone, the elected director is Melissa Abercrombie, Manager of Election Services, County of Oxford. In accordance with OGRA election policies, may I have a motion to destroy the ballots, please? Thank you. May I have a seconder? Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. Congratulations to the elected director, and best of luck to OGRA for the remainder of the conference in the coming year. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Okay. Thank you, Peter. And we certainly sincerely appreciate the City of Brampton for acting as our elections team. Once again, you've done a great job, and we really do appreciate it. Please join me in thanking the City of Brampton, clerks and election departments, and the city in general for volunteering their time to conduct our board elections. The Honourable Caroline Mulroney was first elected as the Member of Provincial Parliament for York Simcoe in 2018. Before entering politics, Caroline had a successful career in the private sector spanning business and law while effectively running a charity benefiting homeless and at-risk women. She previously served as Vice President of Bloomberg Sen Investment Partners, a Toronto-based investment firm. Prior to that, she spearheaded corporate and regulatory matters related to growth opportunities in Canada and the United States for Wellington Financial. Once elected, Caroline was installed as Attorney General of Ontario and the Minister of Francophone Affairs, an office that she continues to hold. Please join me in giving a great OGRA welcome to the Minister of Transportation, the Honourable Caroline Mulroney.
Well, thank you so much, Rick, for that kind introduction and for inviting me here to speak with you all today. It's a great pleasure to be here. Listening to your input and your suggestions is an opportunity that I truly appreciate. And I'm actually so happy to be here to see the great work that is being done across our province. I know that my friends and colleagues, Kinga Surma, the Associate Minister of Transportation, and Vijay Thanagasalam, my parliamentary assistant, are also very grateful for the opportunity to speak as part of this conference. Now, since being appointed Minister of Transportation last June, after having served as Attorney General, I have received a lot of invitations. Invitations from all of my colleagues to come to their ridings. In fact, I've been invited to see a highway, a bridge, a road, an interchange, even culverts in just about every single riding in this province. And so it didn't take me very long to conclude that the Minister of Transportation is a lot more popular than the Attorney General. And I tell Doug Downey, our Attorney General, that it is entirely portfolio dependent and has nothing to do with personality. But in all seriousness, I want to thank everyone in this room for your contribution to Ontario's transportation network. Your work is essential to the prosperity and the vitality of our province, and I promise you that it does not go unnoticed. Some of you have come a long way to share your experiences, your knowledge, and your innovative approaches that work. And this is something that my colleagues and I appreciate a great deal. And I have enjoyed chatting with many of you directly today. Je tiens à remercier toutes les personnes présentes dans cette salle pour votre contribution au réseau de transport de l'Ontario. Votre travail est essentiel à la prospérité et à la vitalité de notre province. Et je vous promets qu'il ne passe pas inaperçu. Certains d'entre vous sont venus de loin pour partager vos expériences, vos connaissances et vos approches novatrices qui fonctionnent. Mes collègues et moi-même vous en sommes très reconnaissants et j'ai apprécié l'opportunité de parler directement avec un certain nombre de vous aujourd'hui. There are many complex challenges facing municipalities, and working together to overcome these challenges is a great accomplishment. Ontarians depend on a reliable transportation system that promotes safety, encourages trade, creates a competitive business environment, and maintains a high quality of life for all. But throughout the province, people are frustrated. Commuters in the Greater Golden Horseshoe are wasting time idling on highways and jammed on subway platforms waiting for the next train that just never seems to come. In rural areas, Ontarians are stuck in communities without access to the reliable transit connections needed to reach vital services. People are upset, and rightly so, that they are unable to get where they need to go in a timely manner. This is a barrier to our province's prosperity and to people's quality of life. And I feel it in my own family. My personal well-being and that of my husband is tested on a regular basis. We have 4 children that we shuttle to and from activities day and night, from hockey to dance and theater. And in fact, after this speech, I'm going to take one of my sons to a playoff game, and I can tell you we better not be late. As a parent, I love the time that I spend in the car with my kids. It actually is, if you have kids, you know that time in the car actually is real quality time. But the quality of that time is diminished by the increasing traffic and the congestion across this region. And it should not be so. I say thank goodness for carpools. All over Ontario, people are suffering because of years of inaction. But that time is over. Our government has a plan to address these problems that have been long overlooked. And we're delivering improvements in every corner of the province. No matter where you are in Ontario, it's happening. We're taking bold steps because we cannot afford to wait any longer. Notre gouvernement a un plan pour résoudre ces problèmes qui ont été longuement négligés. Et nous apportons des améliorations dans tous les coins de la province. Peu importe où vous vous trouvez en Ontario, cela se produit. Nous proposons des mesures audacieuses, car nous ne pouvons plus nous permettre d'attendre plus longtemps. And we're doing that while managing tax dollars responsibly and making smart investments for today and for future generations. It's a critical time for transportation in our province. And I think that you have hit the nail on the head with the theme of this year's conference, a vision for a prosperous tomorrow. But before talking about the future, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the past. Throughout Ontario's history, there have been three major moments in the evolution of transportation. Almost exactly 150 years ago this month, 1 year after Confederation, the Ontario legislature debated an act to authorize and regulate the use of traction engines on highways. That bill sought to establish the rules for how a new technology at the time, engine-powered vehicles, could share the roads with horses. We entered a second phase in the 1920s and early 1930s under Premiers Howard Ferguson and George Henry, when the provincial highway network was expanded. Both premiers recognized that there was a great need to connect communities by road, taking advantage of the rapidly increasing numbers of cars in the province. And the third great moment started in the 1950s under Premier Leslie Frost and saw the beginning of the use of rail as a form of everyday transportation for Ontarians. First with subways in Toronto in 1954, and then eventually the creation of the GO Rail network in 1967 under Premier John Robarts. These moments are worth mentioning because there are times at which provincial governments of the past, all conservative, I might add, recognized that the future demanded bold action to secure our province's future growth and our prosperity. Now, these premiers did not hesitate to seize the moment to make decisions that would change our province forever. And today, we are about to usher in a fourth era in Ontario's transportation history, with the bold action that Premier Ford and our government are taking. We must think big and proceed with unwavering determination if we are going to meet the challenges that are ahead of all of us and achieve our ambitious goals. Just carrying on in the same way as things have always been done is just no longer an option. Our speed limit pilot is a perfect example. As you know, last fall, we launched a pilot project to raise the speed limit to 110 kilometers per hour to explore new ways to improve traffic flow on our provincial highways. The pilot locations are Highway 402 from London to Sarnia, Queen Elizabeth Way from St. Catharines and Lincoln to Hamilton, and Highway 417 from Ottawa-Gloucester to the Ontario-Quebec border. And this spring, we'll be announcing a fourth pilot location in Northern Ontario. We also launched an online consultation so that people could have their say on the pilot. And with well over 8,000 responses, clearly it's a topic that people are interested in. We are willing to make bold changes, and a big part of that is responding to the landscape around us. It's more important than ever for our province to be ready to respond to rapidly emerging technologies. New technology is also reshaping our transportation network. Automated and connected vehicles are forcing us to rethink how we approach everything, from infrastructure to operations and policy. And we're already seeing the impacts of new technologies on Ontario's transportation network. In Toronto, for example, there are over 90,000 drivers registered for Uber, Lyft, and other ride-hailing firms, compared to about 15,000 taxi drivers and just over 5,000 taxis. The City of Toronto estimates that each day, about 3,500 ride-hailing vehicles are in operation at any given time. We've seen some Ontario municipalities partnering with these companies to provide transit and improve services offered during off-peak times. Now, our government recognizes the tremendous opportunities that these new technologies present for improving mobility across Ontario and for boosting our economy. We're focused on improving our network while finding opportunities to create jobs and to support businesses along the way. And of course, as we look towards the future, we must remain focused on ensuring that Ontario's roads and highways remain safe. Not just for the millions of drivers who use our network every day, but for the people who work on our roads and help keep them clear. And I know that's a priority that everyone in this room shares. Last June, our government passed the Getting Ontario Moving Act. In doing so, we took important steps to protect frontline roadside maintenance, construction, tow truck, recovery workers, and any person working on the highway from careless and dangerous drivers by strengthening applicable penalties. Harsher penalties now range from $2,000 to $50,000, license or permit suspension, and even imprisonment for careless and aggressive driving. Our most recent example of bold action came just last week, when I introduced legislation that, if passed, will speed up the delivery of our government's historic $28.5 billion transit expansion plan. The Building Transit Faster Act, if passed, will target red tape and roadblocks that have held up major projects in the past and help us meet our ambitious timelines for those projects. It's a commitment to thinking differently, that if passed, will benefit millions of people throughout the GTA by getting shovels in the ground faster and delivering much-needed subway infrastructure years earlier. Of course, there is much more to Ontario than Toronto. And I want to stress that doing things differently applies right across the province. We're taking a different approach to regional transportation planning, with the development of plans for the North, East, Southwest, and the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And these regional plans will give us a roadmap for improving the transportation system, and they will respond to the unique needs of each region. What's more, they will reflect the feedback of stakeholders and people who actually live and work in these regions. Connecting communities, people, and places is a top priority for our government, and I know that it's one for all of you as well. Our government is investing billions in improvements to the highway network to help people get around more easily and to fight congestion. There are major expansion projects planned and underway in every corner of the province to widen and improve our highways. And at the same time, we're investing in hundreds of rehabilitation projects that keep our network in good shape. This is part of our plan to make responsible investments in critical projects and services that make a real difference in the lives of Ontarians. Just for the period between January 1st and March 31st of this year alone, for example, the Ministry of Transportation plans to tender 78 rehabilitation projects across the province with an estimated value of $717 million. But we know that keeping our roads and transportation networks in good shape is a partnership with everyone in this room. We're committed to working with municipalities and providing the support that you need to succeed and to get people moving in your communities. We know that funding local improvements is a critical part of that work. Relier nos communautés, les gens et les lieux est une priorité pour notre gouvernement. Et je sais que c'est une priorité partagée par tous ceux qui sont ici aussi. Nous nous engageons à travailler avec les municipalités et à vous fournir le soutien dont vous avez besoin pour réussir et pour faire bouger les gens de votre collectivité. Programs such as the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, Provincial Gas Tax, and Connecting Links all provide crucial funding for local road and transit improvements. As my colleague, Laurie Scott, the Minister of Infrastructure, discussed, the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program is a 10-year program that provides up to $30 billion in federal, provincial, and municipal, as well as other partner investments in communities across the province. The funding is distributed among 4 streams: public transit, rural and northern, green infrastructure, and the community, culture, and recreation stream. Our government share will be more than $10.2 billion spread across those 4 streams. Currently, Ontario has nominated over 350 infrastructure projects to the federal government under 3 of these streams to get people moving and to grow the economy. The federal government has recently approved 120 of these projects, including 10 new transit infrastructure projects in the City of London. There is also the gas tax program, which has been a long-term source of dedicated transit funding that municipalities can rely on. The program provides stable and predictable transit funding for Ontario municipalities by providing 2 cents per litre of provincial gas tax to improve and expand transit. In the 2019 Ontario budget, our government committed to reviewing the gas tax program in consultation with municipalities to identify opportunities for improvement. And I'm happy to say that we are following through on that commitment. I'll be announcing more details in this year's funding allocations in the near future. The Connecting Links program is also a great opportunity for municipal funding. Through that program, we help municipalities repair designated municipal roadways and bridges that connect 2 ends of a provincial highway through a community or to a border crossing. Currently, there are 352 kilometers of connecting links with 70 bridges in 77 Ontario municipalities. The province committed $30 million in 2019-2020 to support connecting links projects across the province. And I'll have more details on this year's funding allocations this spring. But of course, supporting municipalities is about more than just funding. It's also about giving you the choice to implement the right solutions for your communities. And that's another way our government is doing things differently. Our e-scooter pilot is a perfect example of how we recognize that there isn't one solution that fits all. Some municipalities may not want to implement e-scooters under the province's pilot project. And there's nothing wrong with that. Municipal leaders know what is best for their cities and for the people living in them. And if they decide that e-scooters is not something that they want, then they have no obligation to implement it. However, for those who do wish to join the pilot, the province has set out the rules and requirements for e-scooters, such as helmet requirements and minimum age. It is up to the municipalities to pass bylaws to allow their use and to determine where they can operate most safely in each community. And I know my colleague and Parliamentary Assistant Vijay Thanagasalam just presented more details on the pilot program earlier this afternoon. Everything that I've discussed today boils down to one main goal: getting people moving across Ontario. And in order to accomplish this, we need to start looking ahead and building for the future. Connecting communities, people, and places is a top priority for our government, and it's something that we look forward to achieving. A strong transportation network will attract investment, job creation, and trade that will benefit all Ontarians and contribute to our economic prosperity. It's not an easy road ahead. There will be challenges, frustration, and inconveniences. But there will also be triumphs and accomplishments. It will be worth it in the end, as this is something that our province desperately needs. Our plan is bold, and under the leadership of Premier Ford, I believe It is something that we can achieve. Notre plan est audacieux et sous la direction du Premier ministre Ford, nous pensons pouvoir y parvenir. Nous faisons bouger l'Ontario et nous bâtissons l'Ontario ensemble. We're getting Ontario moving and we are building Ontario together. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Ladies and gentlemen, we thank Honourable Carolyn Mulroney for coming and spending some time with us today. Out of all the things you talked about relative to roads and culverts, the thing that stuck out to me the most, you're going to a hockey game.
That's right.
I'm a former official, and I'm going to plead with you, please do not yell at the men and women wearing stripes. Thank you very much for a busy day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Always have to stick up for my industry. Our next and final shift disturber is Jess Spieker. Just pay attention to this. Jess Spieker's life was blown apart when she was struck and nearly killed by a driver who T-boned her while she was riding her bike to work. The driver inflicted a broken spine, brain injury, and such extensive soft tissue damage that Jess nearly died a second time from serious blood clot-related complications. Her story is not unique. The road violence that nearly killed Jess kills approximately 120 vulnerable road users every year in Ontario. Jess is the spokesperson for the Friends and Families for Safe Streets. She is here to explain why we need to see this as an urgent public health crisis that Vision Zero will address. It is my pleasure to introduce Jess Spieker.
Thank you. Thanks. Great. Thanks, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here to speak to all of you today. As you heard, my name is Jessica Spieker, and I represent a group called Friends and Families for Safe Streets. We're a group of people whose loved ones have been killed in road violence or who have survived serious injury as the result of a collision. We advocate for vulnerable road users. Sorry, there we go. And vulnerable road users are anybody who's walking around, riding a bike, using a mobility device, a first responder, a solid waste worker, and a construction worker, or anybody who's on the road that does not have the benefit of being encased within several thousand pounds of metal. The reason that we advocate for vulnerable road users is that although death for motor vehicle occupants is trending downwards, deaths for vulnerable road users are stubbornly trending up. You can see in this graphic that many cities around the world are successfully decreasing their rate of death. But here in Toronto, we're doing the opposite. Here's a more detailed year-by-year breakdown of road violence in Toronto. This is the number of vulnerable road users killed every year since 2005. And look at that yellow trend line. That is shocking and alarming. We should not see that be going up. If we compare that with data for Ontario, we can see the situation is slightly better, but not by all that much. Again, deaths are trending upwards and not downwards. So I hope you can see that road violence is a clear, undeniable, and urgent public health crisis in Ontario and in Toronto. All of the data points that contributed to those graphs that I just showed you, those were not numbers. Those were people. Those were people that we loved. Those were people that had value. Those were people that made contributions in our society. Those were mothers. Those were fathers. Those were children. Those were our brothers and sisters. And those were our friends. Our group was founded in 2016 by 3 people, Kasia Briegman-Sampson, David Stark, and Yu Lee. Kasia's husband, Tom Sampson, was riding his bike and stopped at a red light, perfectly in obedience of the law, when he was rear-ended by a driver who was speeding. That driver catapulted Tom into the intersection where he was struck a second time by another oncoming vehicle. You can see from the front-end damage to this vehicle and Tom's mangled bike that he didn't stand a chance. Imagine this, being unleashed on someone that you love. David Stark's wife, Erica, was killed while she was standing on a sidewalk in Scarborough. The driver that hit her was speeding so egregiously and dangerously that she completely lost control of her minivan, swerved off the roadway, she hit a utility box, a light standard, and then Erica, and still had enough speed to kill Erica on the scene. Erica was the warm, loving mother of 3 young boys. Yuli's good friend, Jiong Kang, was riding his bike on Finch Avenue when he was struck and killed by a drunk driver. He was 44 years old, a husband, and the father of a 15-year-old boy. The driver who killed him was known for making posts glorifying drunk driving on social media. 1 month earlier, her license had been suspended for a DUI. She was so drunk at that time, she passed out in the police station. That license suspension did nothing to stop her from getting behind the wheel again and killing someone. Heather Sims' father, Gary, was right-hooked by a driver while he was riding his bike in 2017. The driver was behind him, must have seen him, overtook him, and nevertheless turned right and drove over him, immediately into his path. Gary hung on in the hospital for 2 days, fighting not to die. But after 2 days, his family watched him slip away. He was the beating heart of his family and the life of every party, and he is desperately missed. Kendra Pape's sister, Kim Pape Green, was killed when a driver turned left into her while Kim was walking across the street. Kim had 3 children. She was the glue and the rock of her family. It was a foggy evening, but despite the low visibility, the driver who killed her was traveling at such reckless speed that the impact was fatal. You can see the crash was so violent, it knocked Kim's shoes off her feet. Kim struggled so hard not to die in the emergency room for hours, not to leave her children behind, but her injuries were too severe. Meredith Wilkinson was riding her bike to work in a bike lane when the driver of a garbage truck, again, overtook her, must have seen her, turned right over top of her path, and dragged her under a wheel. The medical euphemism for the injury that did to her leg is degloving, but what that means is that the flesh was violently ripped off of her bones and her leg was not salvageable. She required an amputation, extensive skin grafting, and she had to live in a rehabilitation hospital for 3 months away from her young son. In all of that, Meredith never lost consciousness, and she remembers everything. I was riding my bike to work in 2015 when a driver of a huge SUV made a left turn and T-boned me. She broke my spine, she inflicted a brain injury, and she did such extensive damage to the left side of my body, the side that she hit, that I developed a huge blood clot in my left leg, and a little later, a big piece of that clot broke off, chewed its way through my heart, and it landed across both lobes of my lungs. That's called a massive bilateral pulmonary embolism, and it's usually fatal. I am extremely lucky to be here talking to you today. Besides showing you what road violence is like when it happens, I want to raise the curtain on what it is like after it happens to you. What you face after a crash, in some cases, is worse than the violence you've already experienced. You face a woefully inadequate police investigation. For example, drivers' cell phone records are almost never subpoenaed, even though they even could be. That step is usually not even taken, so victims and families often never really know for sure why a crash happened. In and of itself, it is not actually illegal to slam your vehicle into a vulnerable road user. So the charges that drivers usually get are things like an unsafe turn or failure to yield, which carry tiny fines and few, if any, demerit points. These meaningless, weak consequences are an insult to the lives of those that are killed and injured. But perhaps worst of all, we're thrust into a battle with an outright hostile and profoundly broken insurance industry, which fights all of our claims tooth and nail. They'll look for evidence of things like marital counseling, because maybe you didn't love your dead spouse that much, so they can compensate you less. They'll send you to fraudulent doctors who have been repeatedly investigated and chastised by the College of Physicians and Surgeons for writing false and misleading reports. All of that is not the fault of the road itself, but all of that could be spared us by better road design. And all of that we have to face when we are at our very most broken, when we are struggling not to drown in grief, when we are trying to help children cope with loss, and trying to come to terms with the fact that our lives, as we knew them, are shattered, and the futures that we had in mind for ourselves are utterly wrecked. But why does this happen at all? We hear so much victim blaming in the media, but it's just not true. The statistics don't bear that out. This is the Toronto Police statistics showing that the large majority of pedestrians who are killed did absolutely nothing wrong. Many of them were crossing the street on a green light. And given the weak investigations of police that I mentioned, which has a lot to do with the fact that they don't have very many resources, a lot of drivers' accounts of crashes are taken at face value and little investigation is done. So that number is probably artificially low. It's also not because of smartphones. The best and most robust research that we have shows that victim distraction by smartphones is a factor in, at most, 1/5 of 1% of the time. This is not why vulnerable road users are being killed, and we need to do better than constantly regurgitating this false narrative. After all, these houses, this business, and this playground were not using a smartphone. They didn't suddenly dart into the middle of the street. The most universal cause underlying road violence is dangerous, car-centric street design that was only designed to achieve the unobstructed, fast movement of motor vehicles. But it turns out that when you combine that with human beings who make errors, it's a recipe for predictable, violent death. These are the very streets where some of our loved ones were killed. You'll notice wide, straight lanes that look like Highway 401, which encourage drivers to drive at speeds that are very dangerous. You'll notice the lack of any kind of physical protection between the motor vehicles and vulnerable road users. And the streets are often so many lanes that to walk across the street is hostile for anybody with a mobility impairment who's not an athletic 30-year-old. To ask somebody to cross 7 lanes of traffic is a huge amount of exposure to motor vehicles, and it's just not safe. If the design of any other system in our lives caused this much violent death, life-ruining injury, and incomprehensible suffering, we would declare it a state of emergency. We would set that system on fire and we would fix it, no matter the cost. By the same token, fixing our dangerous street design to save lives is a moral imperative that we can no longer ignore. And that's where Vision Zero comes in. Vision Zero's core belief is that life and health can never be exchanged for other benefits within society. What might those other benefits be? An example is political expedience for our leaders, because it's a whole lot easier not to stick your neck out and fight for change. It's a lot easier to just let it happen, but that's not good enough. Another benefit that we exchange safety for might be convenience for car drivers, shaving off 30 seconds of car commuting times. But if you're talking about challenges to your wellness, a few extra minutes in your car has got nothing on when the police come to your doorstep to tell you that your spouse is dead, or when you wake up in the hospital with a broken spine and a brain injury. We have to move from our old way of conceptualizing road violence to a new one. The only way road violence has ever successfully been resolved anywhere in the world is by conceptualizing it not as being inevitable and a product of scoundrel individual behavior, but by recognizing it as being that all death and serious injury is unquestionably preventable. And we must upload responsibility for safety from the fallible individual users of the road up to the level of the design of the road, so that even when users fail and make stupid mistakes, the system will still keep you safe, and nobody will have to die or wake up in the hospital. I must also point out, for any leaders in the room, this does not stop at announcing Vision Zero. You can't say those 2 words and then be done. You have to follow it up with concrete action and road redesign. Lip service does not save lives. Road redesign saves lives. So what do we want you to do? If you're inclined to approach me and express some kind of condolences after this presentation, but if you're a leader who sat on your hands and watched people in your community die, if you've had an opportunity to fight for change and not taken it, or if you've actively fought against changes to make our streets safer because you think it won't be convenient, I'd ask you to hold your condolences. Your words are empty. Instead, what we need you to do is develop the political will to make changes. And it's hard. I know that what I'm asking you to do is hard. It's the same story in every city. You propose an infrastructure improvement, you get a rash of people coming out and hurling abuse at you. I've received that abuse myself. It really hurts and it's hard, but don't let that scare you off. What I'm asking you to do most of all is be brave when you're fighting for these changes. I'm asking you to educate people about the myths that lead people to obstruct and vote against road safety changes. Myths like the fact that reduced speed limits will dramatically increase your car commuting time. It's simply not true. We have data to prove that. The myth that vulnerable road users don't pay their fair share of taxes that fund the road, that's not true. Everybody pays their municipal, federal, and provincial taxes. The street should be safe for everyone. Or the idea that if you build a complete street, it's going to somehow gut your local economy. Every time you build a complete street, local businesses are enriched and not impoverished. And as you're fighting for change, I'd ask you to keep in mind that although doing your job can be hard, what is harder is suffering the hell that is road violence. We have all the resources that we need here in Ontario to build safe streets. The designs already exist. We don't have to innovate. The designs are not that complicated or difficult to build or even expensive to build. There's no reason in Ontario, such a prosperous and intelligent place, not to adopt a province-wide Vision Zero strategy. We should be a shining leader for the world in road safety. We should not be lagging behind. Nobody should ever die on a street in Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think Jess deserves another round of applause. And I'd like to thank Jess for her comments. I'd like to thank her for all her advocacy work that she does for friends and families, for safe streets, talking about the issues that we have around road violence and reminding us that we have a way forward and that there are plans out there like Vision Zero that need to be followed and enforced. Now, joint and several liability, Vision Zero, minimum maintenance standards, policy defense, human behavior, risk management, as the title of this session suggests, it can be a mess out there. Managing roadways in the 21st century is a complex and engineering and legal struggle. What are the factors that govern the design and maintenance of roadways, and how can municipalities incorporate practices that limit their risk exposure? Here to look at this issue in detail is an expert panel from the insurance industry and engineering professions. We have Jessica Jamremchuk, is the Director of Risk Management Services for the Frank Cowan Company. A lawyer by training, Jessica works to help municipalities better understand and respond to risk. Joining Jessica is Adam Campbell, Practice Lead Human Factors at 30 Forensic Engineering. A professional engineering by training, Adam works with clients to understand how human behavior can lead to catastrophic results and how engineering decisions need to embed human behavior. As well, Scott Butler, Ontario Good Roads Association Manager of Policy and Research, will be joining them to facilitate the discussion.
All right. So welcome to really what is a session that is a bit of a Frankenstein session. We bolted together a whole bunch of things that have been top of mind we've heard from our members about. Paul listed them off earlier. We have joint and several liability, Vision Zero, minimum maintenance standards, policy defense, human behavior, risk management, and I could keep going on. We called it It's a Mess Out There. This session is called It's a Mess Out There, in part because it is a mess out there. We're going to sprinkle some floor mics at some point through the floor. So if people have burning questions, you have two phenomenal experts up here. I'd encourage you to go up to the mic, just sort of flag me down and we'll get your question worked in. Otherwise, I'm going to start the conversation off and we'll proceed from there. We're going to cover off a number of those topics that I listed off at the outset. So to bring us up to speed, Jessica, who I think many of you have heard from before a number of times, is going to talk about where we're at from that risk management liability insurance perspective.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me back at Ontario Good Roads. It's always a pleasure to be here and see so many familiar faces. I won't get too in-depth. Like Scott said, I know a lot of you have had to listen to me over the years talk about joint and several liability and various other liability issues. I think that we find ourselves in a very precarious situation right now. We have the issue of joint and several liability, but we also have issues like apportionment of liability. So that single driver that gets into an accident and sues the municipality. Unfortunately, we're not apportioning that liability, that contributory negligence, to that person. So when you take joint and several liability, you add on the apportionment of liability that definitely is not swinging in the municipality's favor right now. And then you start to look at things like aging infrastructure, asset management planning. You start to look at changes in our roadways. How many municipalities have been encouraged to include more walk-friendly streets or bike lanes? Well, that makes the roadway a little bit narrower, doesn't it? Have your plows gone on a diet and gotten smaller? Your buses? No. There are a lot of things that municipalities need to address when it comes to roads. About 80% of the roads are municipalities' responsibility. That's huge. And when you look at Canada and our vast geography, and you look at other countries, if you look to our neighbors to the south in the US, the tax base that they have to draw from to deal with these issues, and then compare that to the tax base that you have to draw from to deal with those issues. I think what this means is that in Ontario, we need to be creative. We need to think outside of the box. We need to work together. We need to start trying to find solutions that not just solve the problems we have now, but address the problems that we see coming. And to look outside of the box, I think that education and talking and being at conferences like this together is one of the most important steps. And I think that bringing in experts from various different fields, talking about things like human behavior, are going to be key in the success of municipalities moving forward with better risk management strategies for their roads.
Okay, so Jessica's given us the overview from the insurance sector, and I think that's familiar to a lot of people in the room, or it should be. Adam is the practice lead for the human factors group at 30 Forensic Engineering. I'm wondering, from your perspective, Adam, can you run us through what is forensic engineering? What's the application to the folks in the room as custodians of roadways? How do you keep busy during the day? Just give us an overview of what it is that you do. Has anyone used his services? I feel like I should ask this ahead of time.
Not even one hand, hey? Well.
Yeah, all right, there you go. So
is it me? Is it me?
He brought lots of business cards.
Yeah, well, thank you, Scott and Jessica and the OGRA for having me. So, what keeps me busy, unfortunately, is the 1 in a million things that happen on your roadways, the things that you try to prepare for, but then slip through the cracks a little bit, that can't be fixed before those catastrophic events take place, those car accidents that are in some respect at least alleged to have been the result of some negligence or liability on the part of the municipality or the roadway authority responsible for maintaining them. And so we, in the forensic engineering space, what we do is we're sort of tasked with rewinding the tape earlier on in time to reconstruct the events of what actually happened, to get the most granular information, the most and best information out there to understand what truly happened on the road, so that you set the foundation for figuring out what to do from that point, in both mounting your defense against a claim of negligence made against your region or municipality, but also to use it at the earliest stages possible to best understand what to do to get out ahead of situations that might take place, to prevent them from ever happening or to reduce their likelihood of happening on your roadways. So I am the type of person that, among others in our type of space, that get the call from lawyers and insurance companies, and the call always starts off by saying, I got a case, as I'm sure you get those calls as well. You've had a car accident, and now what do you do? And so from my perspective, what I look at on the human factors side is how people interact with the environment that they're in particular, how the roadway design and all the visual information and all the experiences and expectations that drivers come to form as a result of being on your roadways affect the decisions they make in those critical moments of a car crossing the center of the road, and they're there to take evasive action to try and do what they can to avoid the accident, or there might be a winter maintenance issue and drivers are passing through a slippery section, and what do they do? And they know they're confronting aspects of the roadway that they should or ought to have known were slippery in advance of their arrival. So those are the questions that we get asked, and we're just another cog in the wheel as risk management is, and sort of the entire spectrum of time that takes place between, getting out ahead of things on the risk side and looking at it after it's taken place, to understand at most what happened and the things that we can do to prevent them happening again in the future.
So we just heard from the other Jess Spieker from Friends and Families for Safe Streets. She made a fairly, I think, compelling case for taking action on this. Whether it's Vision Zero, whether it's some other method that might be used, I think there's an understanding and a desire on the part of a lot of people to see roadways made safer. How, from your perspectives, your unique perspectives, how do we go about doing that? How do we put these ideas and these calls to action into our everyday practices? How do we modify the assets that we already have? Do you want to start there, Jess?
Sure. I think it's a very difficult question, and I don't think there's one good answer. I think there has to be a collaboration of efforts. I think that municipalities need to work together to try and figure out what the best way is to move forward with our road systems. Jess's speech it's difficult to hear. Right. I think it's hard for all of us. No one wants there to be deaths on our roads. No one wants people to be catastrophically injured. It's something that I think we can all relate to. I think that making our roads safer is the way we need to go, and do whatever we can to do that, whether that's adopting a Vision Zero framework, learning from countries and areas that have adopted that sort of framework. That could be a great place to start. I think that we also have to make sure that we understand, though, that no matter how safe we make our roads, unfortunately, there are going to be accidents, and municipalities will usually be the ones that are still named in that lawsuit, no matter what.
Okay. Put the engineering lens on this.
Yeah,
how do we move forward with these ideas?
The unfortunate reality, and when you look at and study the behavior of people in these situations that do unfortunately happen, the harsh reality and the truth of the matter is that no matter what we want to try and preach, people are fallible. We are not perfect creatures. We will make mistakes. We have limitations to what we can do as people confronting situations that we aren't anticipating. And so, part of what is great about Vision Zero is the adoption of that philosophy that people are going to make the mistake. So how do we build resilience into the system that accepts that mistake taking place, but limits the extent of damage and harm that can come when those mistakes are made? Very similar philosophies are commonplace in aviation and healthcare is another industry where they deal with a mass sort of health issue as transportation does generally, and is considering the concepts of resilience from a perspective of adopting and accepting human error as part of the system, and using that as the starting point for design, planning, risk management, and litigation strategy, really. So can you design out all of the potential ways in which people can become harmed on the roadways? Call me a cynic, I don't think that's entirely possible because there are too many of us, and the 1 in a million, as I said, happens every single day. You can't possibly remove all the potential threats on the road. People being people, we will make our mistakes. What you can do is prepare for those in as much advance as possible by shifting the mindset, if you haven't yet gone through that journey of accepting failure as part of what it's going to take to move the ship, this really heavy thing that's anchored in the harbor. Can we move this thing a little bit further down? It's going to take a shift in mindset, I think, to really start seeing differences on our roads.
Okay, so one of the things I think that we have acknowledged, and certainly the province has acknowledged previously, is joint and several liability poses it proposes a vexatious problem for municipalities. I think that's the term that's always stuck in there. Are there other limitations or inconsistencies in the regulatory and legal framework that governs roadways in Ontario that you think may undermine efforts to make the roadways safer? Joint and several is one that pops to mind, but I'm wondering, between the two of you, you've certainly seen a lot of examples of these sort of inconsistencies. I'm wondering if you could talk to what you've seen and how you would counsel municipalities to address those difficult places they find themselves in, legally speaking.
I think that the thing that is even more vexatious to me than joint and several, as you know, is the apportionment of liability issue. People need to start taking responsibility for their mistakes and their actions. A municipality shouldn't be 50% responsible when a 17-year-old kid takes his dad's SUV and goes around a corner too fast and becomes injured. That's absolutely ridiculous. How do we fix that? Unfortunately, I don't know, because the person that's making that decision is the judge. Again, the human factor. Judges see sympathetic plaintiffs, and we get some very disappointing decisions against municipalities. I think we can also look to, even something like the minimum maintenance standards. The MMS were designed and developed to be a defense for municipalities. Under Section 44(3) of the Municipal Act, that's that third defense you have. You've got three. They added in the MMS as that third one to say, okay, if you're following this, if you're going by this guideline, essentially, you shouldn't be held responsible or liable. Seems like a great idea, and it is. I am all for the minimum maintenance standards. But again, when a case goes to court, it's being reviewed, it's being weighed out, it is being decided, again, by humans. So many of you will probably remember the Giuliani decision. That was one of the first big cases. I think the decision came out in, I'm going to say 2011, or the appeal decision was out in 2011. And that was one of the first big cases that hit the courts where the municipality was using the MMS as a defense. And when you looked at it, you thought, slam dunk. This is exactly what the MMS is here for. Awesome. But that decision blew a hole through our MMS. The judge essentially decided that, the MMS doesn't actually apply here. What it's talking about, it doesn't address when, the snow's below 2 centimeters or, that sort of thing. So all of a sudden, something that we thought was, going to be this fantastic thing, well, we fell down a bit there. We stumbled. But what did we do? We revamped it. We did it again. You don't give up. You go back to the drawing board. You have those working committees. You try to look at every possibility. Adding in the deeming provisions, I think, to the MMS this time around is an excellent idea. Is it foolproof? No. But I think it's a great start. I think it's a great tool to have in our belts. Policy defenses were mentioned as well. Do I believe that if a road maintenance level of service policy or call-out policy is made based on budgetary constraints and is, by any definition of the law or the case law, a true policy decision, which means it should be immune. You should not be held responsible if it's a true policy decision. Do I think that that will work all the time? No, of course not. A judge is going to say that that policy maybe wasn't reasonable. But would I encourage municipalities to make sure that their levels of service and the policies and procedures that they have are written down, are recorded, are passed by council so that they can be used and say, hey, this was a policy based on our budgetary decisions, based on our budgetary constraints and the resources we have, true policy decision, there you go. I think that we need to make sure that we have all of those tools in our belt. Meet the minimum maintenance standards. Is it going to be foolproof? No. Make sure you have policies written. Make sure that you are following those policies and that they're passed by council. Have that in your belt as well. And then, I don't know if there's anything I talk more about than just documentation. Let us prove that you did what we know you were doing. Mm-hmm. That documentation is key. We're never going to win a claim unless we have that documentation, whether that's in the form of GPS records, whether that's in the form of the old school diary logs that are sitting with you in the plow.
Yeah, to pick up on that point, it's really, Jessica and I, it's interesting, we sort of sit, like I said, at sort of these ends of the time frame of how a claim plays out. And when Jessica's asking for documentation at the earliest stage, it's that type of stuff that is logged in the file, stays with the file, and moves down in years and years until the litigation process initiates, that it lands on the desk of someone like me. And 3 years later, after a collision or some event has taken place, memories have faded, stories have adjusted. Where you working? When did you start? When did you run the plow? Are you sure? Do you remember? Did you have other things going on? Were you in a hurry? Yes or no? All of these, like what would have been a concrete memory, something to lock down and document at the earliest stage when it's crystal clear, is lost to you as time passes. And so what you're also losing is the strength of the argument you can make years later when it's going to have to be made, if come the day that you want to move it along to the trial stage. And so it's a garbage in, garbage out situation. If you don't have good data in the earliest stages of your investigation, you're going to be really hard pressed to defend yourself. And the best defense is certainly your best defense is a strong offense. And by being transparent in that respect, sometimes more information will hang you out to dry a little bit. That's the bit of the reality of the situation as well. But data is great, and it helps you through every stage of your investigation.
So you work specifically, just 1 second there, Jess. I wanted to talk on the human factors aspect. Mm-hmm. Are there areas where human behavior functions in a certain way, but the law has a different expectation, and you see those becoming contributing factors? So,
we've mentioned minimum maintenance standards. We always get an interesting conversation going in our office when the law is distinct from science. Sometimes these things line up perfectly, and that's I would say a rare situation, unfortunately. But in the minimum maintenance world, for an example, in allowances of like sidewalk slab elevation changes of the 2 centimeters that would constitute a trip hazard by minimum maintenance standard, is actually much higher and allows too much of a transition than what we know is a defined trip hazard by the study of how people walk through, urban or rural centers. And so there are disconnections between science and standards. And in the court setting, when these issues do arise, standards go in as any other evidence. Like a witness would say, I saw the event happen, here are the things that I observed to have taken place on the day. Standards go in and have to be challenged, and their credibility and their validity needs to be challenged as well. And so I oftentimes am asked to sort of comment on why is there a difference between human movement science and a standard being adopted by a municipality? And is there a better, more elegant standard that should be considered? And is it one that will minimize the potential for risk or harm of people walking on the road? The judges demand that. We're not pushing that on them in any way. They're asking for context for why this standard. Why is it the number? Why is it 2 centimeters? How come it isn't 1.5 centimeters or less? So although the sort of standard and policy defenses are of defense to make, they have their own other ball of wax in terms of risk to deal with at the court setting, in the court sitting as well. So the disconnect is interesting. Probably not, you wouldn't see it as interesting from someone who studies human behavior. It certainly is.
You wanted to jump in there, Jess?
The only thing that I wanted to mention that I thought it was, you had mentioned early on when you were speaking about learning from industries like aviation and healthcare. And then that talk about documentation really hit home for me, that if there's 2 industries that are so good at and is such a part of the job, the whole aspect of documentation, learning from them I think is an excellent idea in that sense. A nurse her shift isn't over until the progress notes, the history and physical, till all of those are filled out in the chart. It's that idea of documentation being just as important as that actual visiting with the patient or flying the plane.
And another thing to draw, it's a great example, in healthcare, and not to say that it's an apples to apples comparison between healthcare and transportation necessarily, but what healthcare is finding, that the more transparent they are with their information within themselves and also in conveying that information to those involved in events where harm does take place, like a patient is injured as a result of some event that happens in hospital, there is an interesting relationship there, and they're finding that the more transparent and open and honest they are about what actually happened and what transpired is reducing the number of medical malpractice claims made against hospitals and physicians. I'm not suggesting you go out and do that and trust that it's all going to work and show everyone your cards and where all those stinky, nasty little corners are, your roadway transportation network. But there are examples where even in the most contentious of situations where health and life are on the line, transparency and information is helping in a way that they didn't expect it could.
So I see the floor mics are out there now, and if you have a question you'd like to ask, I'd encourage you to go up there. We'll keep an eye on it. One of the things that has been touched upon in a number of different ways in the conference up to this point is this sort of broad paradigm shift that's taking place within the sector as a whole. How people are moving around is changing, how they expect to move around is changing. Through it all, I think there becomes a bit of a tension between the technology being imposed on the transportation sector more broadly and the municipal responsibilities and perspectives. What advice would you offer municipalities, councils who have responsibilities clearly articulated for them when they're bumping up against these big technological shifts that are happening throughout the world? Do you want to start with that one, Adam?
Sure. I think this is a really interesting and exciting time, and what tends to happen in the conversation around autonomous vehicles, connected infrastructure, is we tend to glaze over the challenges from sort of the consumer's perspective. We just want to be driven and do our crossword puzzles and things on the way to work and move a little bit further out of our where we'd otherwise live and pay a little bit less so we can be self-driven in to our workplaces every day. The reality, though, is that right now we're in a place where, we don't know where the technology is going. Tesla is different from Uber, who's different from Volvo, who's different from Waymo, and everyone else who's trying to build the next wave of transportation. And, as a municipality, if you talk to any of those companies, they call you guys the fun police, right? If you guys came in and said, we want you to pump the brakes, we want to know what the technology is going to do so we can better maintain, design, and control our roadway system to best allow for your technology to work on it. All they hear when those conversations are attempted to be had is you're going to stall their innovation. They want to move forward at light speed, because it's a first to market win here that they're going for. They're going for the pot of gold and they want to get there first. So it is a challenge out there, and I would urge caution by trying to do too much too soon to remediate, to alter your roadway system until you know what the technology is going to look like that will be driving on your roads. I mean, if you heard the thought that there might be a 3-meter wide SUV that's going to be sold massively out there and everyone's going to buy one, would you all of a sudden start widening all your roads today? Probably not. You'd want to know who's going to buy it. If they're going to buy it, is it going to pass muster from the consumer level? So I would urge waiting until you know where this is going before investing too harshly on it.
Did you want to elaborate on that, Jess?
Sure. I think that municipalities are in a very difficult situation. You have communities, you have your ratepayers that are used to having things instantly. They're used to Amazon. They're used to paying everything online. They're used to everything being, easy on the internet. They're jumping forward with, Internet of Things probably at their offices and workplaces. And so they expect that from you. We all know that ratepayers expect a lot from municipalities, and it's going to be no different, and it is no different when it comes to tech, whether that's tech being wireless internet in your community or that tech being your roadway. One of the problems is that you also have that responsibility to take care of your community. And, to Adam's point, we don't know yet. So there has to be that level of caution and reserve when it comes to some technologies because we don't know. I think that, and actually I'm stealing this from you, you had said earlier, and I've been thinking about this, that it's going to be a bit of a mess. It's going to be a bit of a mess over the next few years as we figure out how autonomous vehicles work with regular vehicles, work with the traffic light system, work with the roadways the way they are. And, Adam described it as, like being a teenager, right? It's like those teenage years. Do we want to ultimately get to a place with the best transportation at the most affordable cost that takes into account the environment and is amazing? Of course we do. But I think there's no doubt, and no one should be disillusioned by the fact that it's going to be difficult to get there. We don't have precedent for what the courts will say when an autonomous vehicle with a driver who's sitting there eating a Big Mac gets into an accident. It's not like a slip and fall claim or a traditional MVA. I don't have 85 years of jurisprudence. I don't have that to rely on to say, I think the claim is going to come out this way, or we can pretty much see liability resting here. It's a completely new frontier with these sorts of issues. The one thing I would say, and don't quote me on this, although I see it's being taped, I am going to be very interested to see what happens when autonomous vehicles are on the road and there are incidents and there's a catastrophic accident, and now that person who is in that car, maybe as a passenger, is now a paraplegic. We know that traditionally right now, that person who was that injured party in the car is going to sue the driver, who we all know only has 1 or 2 million car insurance, and they're going to drag in the municipality, right? That's what we deal with every day, right? They're going to bring in the municipality, deep pocket, 1%, joint and several, whatever you want to call it, they're going to bring you in. What's going to happen when there's another deep pocket at the table, or that could potentially be pulled into the table? And does Tesla maybe have more money than the municipality? Could they maybe be seen as someone that they would want to pull in just as much as they want to pull in that municipality to try and get that 1%? I honestly don't know, but it is something that I'm extremely interested to see.
Okay, the clock's really working against us here. I'm going to go over here to the microphone. Can I please get your name and your hometown?
Yeah, my name is Ted Smith. I'm the regional councillor for the Township of Brock in the region of Durham. And a comment and a question, short comment, that is I wish the term minimum maintenance standards could get eliminated from the vocabulary. It sends the message to the people that we're doing their absolute least we can do. Just call them maintenance standards. So, question, and this is gets back to the technology factor. And you haven't really discussed anything about enforcement. There's things out there like photo radar and red light cameras that I know that 15 years ago I had a chance to go to Australia and we really noticed that nobody was speeding. Nobody. And why? Because they have a very effective photo radar that they enforce strictly. Why can't we do that here? I know it's provincial regulation. I know they brought it in a few zones, but would that not be a method that we could effectively reduce the risks and also take some load off of our enforcement body?
Maybe before answering that, I can speak to why the minimum remains in the minimum maintenance standard. This was actually something that was entertained during the last review. As you might appreciate, when you're having to amend the legislation now for municipalities, it required amending two acts, the Municipal Act as well as the City of Toronto Act, and the sequencing didn't allow for that to take place. That is something that's an ongoing concern, and that'll be brought in, I suspect, to the next round of the minimum maintenance standard review. But that's the sad background to that one. In terms of your question, photo radar as a behavior modifying device, either of you want to jump on that?
Yeah, I mean, it works. The threat of penalty is one thing that human beings respond quite well to. We have two young girls at home, and I threaten them many times a day to get their clothes on and eat their dinner, and not with harm, but with no cartoons or something. But threats of potential pain in the literal or financial sense are real deterrents. They do change behavior, and when it comes to what behavior you're modifying, speed is one that is important. Of course, we all know that speed is a critical factor in any collision situation, but we oftentimes see speed being a factor when you're traveling even 10 kilometers per hour over speed limits, the level that you would say, the officer sort of grants you a little bit of that leeway if you were moving through the radar zone and traveling a little bit higher than the posted speeds. And so speed is important at so many levels. It is. Lowering speeds, even on posted speed limits in certain areas of Toronto, is shown to have a decrease frequency of severe and fatal collisions. That's not enforcement, that's just changing the information you're providing drivers. And that's just recently published information that's coming out now. So in any which way that you can attempt to enforce, or at least create the illusion or threat of penalty, is a way that you can certainly affect driver behavior, there's no question.
So with the spirit of threat on the table, I have to apologize to Mark, who just scooched up to the microphone there. We'll maybe ask the question offline afterwards. Please join me in, we're out of time. I want to thank both of our panelists. I think it was food for thought. Hopefully there's something in there that'll trigger some reflection on your part, and maybe something there you can take away. Thank you.
I can't. Hey. Okay. Jennifer French was first elected as member of provincial parliament for Oshawa in June 2014. As a dedicated educator, Jennifer has over 10 years experience teaching in Ontario and abroad and is invested in community theatre and the arts in Oshawa. Currently, Jennifer is the official opposition critic for infrastructure and transportation. Please give an OGRA welcome to Jennifer French.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I recognize that there's nothing better than listening to a politician as you're waiting to chat with each other at the end of the day. But I am very pleased to be invited and very glad to join you again this year. First, I would like to appreciate that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And as we meet here together, I hope that we can be mindful of our commitment as Ontarians to true and meaningful reconciliation as we move forward to strengthen our communities and build a stronger province, especially as we are living in a time of conflict. We must challenge ourselves to make our province better together and build those bridges. And I would like to appreciate the invitation to join you today. I recognize many here from across the province and communities and from various sectors that have a vested interest in building and maintaining good, safe roads and infrastructure. Every major project in the province is tied to infrastructure, I don't have to tell you, and nearly all projects depend on our roadways to build it or access it. Everyone across communities relies in some way on our roads, and they depend on good roads, whether they travel on them themselves or they eat the food or buy the goods that do. And thank you very sincerely for the work that you do across the province. So as you were told, my name is Jennifer French, and I am here on behalf of the official opposition and the Ontario NDP. I know that our leader, Andrea Horvath, was pleased to join you this morning, and I am here again this year in my capacity as the NDP critic for infrastructure, transportation, and highways. I'm the MPP for Oshawa, and I'm sure that a few of my colleagues are here from the Durham region. But I know that other folks from across the province are here that I have been very glad to learn from and meet with through the years at AMO, at Roma, and OGRA, and advocacy meetings at Queen's Park and in our communities. I'd like to thank the returning and new municipal leaders who continue to advocate for and serve their communities. You are the level of government that is closest to the people, and in my experience, among the most in touch with local needs and concerns. I appreciate this conference and the people who come to make it a success every year. I meet often with construction and aggregate folks who are ready and waiting to build the infrastructure and roads that will make our province safer and better. And I am always glad to work with and learn from those who have reached out on safety issues, who have been tireless in their advocacy for safer roadways and predictable, effective winter road maintenance. Because of the advocacy of road safety proponents, my colleague Jessica Bell, the NDP transit critic, and I have tabled a few private members' bills to try to achieve those safer roads. And in my case, with Bill 122, for stronger penalties if something goes terribly wrong. The vision, as we know, is zero. All Ontarians need to be safe, and not only do we value and appreciate the work that you do as municipalities and partners, and as the united voice of OGRA, but we, the NDP, are partners with you in that vision. I know that many of you are wanting clear answers and commitments from our government so that you can start or continue projects that affect your communities. And it's hard to make plans when you can't get those answers. Last year, I stood here at this conference and highlighted all the projects that were in limbo, waiting for answers or direction or are still under review. And it is frustrating to know that a year later, many of you are still in that same situation. I know that you've heard from a few ministers of the government, and I'm glad that you have. You deserve to know where we are headed, and I am sure that you heard about subways, but I'm not actually going to talk about subways, unless it is to recognize that people need transit pathways to get around this province that are all interconnected. Whether it's rail, roads, LRT, cars, bicycles, or bus, roadways and pathways have to be connected. They must also be planned well and in consultation with other projects and partners. Municipal partners are invaluable. They're not in the way. And I would like I would like for them to stop having to ask to be consulted in a meaningful way. That is something that I've heard repeatedly from different communities, is that they would like to be included in the conversations. Municipal partners, sorry, I just said that line, but municipal partners absolutely are key in plans that will work for communities. Across the province, I am recognizing a theme of uncertainty. I hear it from everyday people and from different levels of government. And regardless of what you think of this government or its politics and policies, I think that we all recognize they are moving through their agenda at breakneck speed. And it isn't easy to be clear on the details. I believe that we should fully respect our regional and municipal governments. As I've said, these are the levels of government closest to our neighbors and businesses and community issues. The province has to be a real partner and recognize the local expertise and work closely to ensure that priorities are considered and needs are met when making decisions. The province should also respect funding for infrastructure and preserve that funding, especially for smaller communities. One size does not and cannot fit all. Rural Ontario is not like downtown Toronto. I am sure that folks in this room want to believe the government's claims to be helping small towns, and quite sincerely, I hope that you can believe them. As critic for infrastructure and transportation and highways, I have sat across from the ministers at committee and asked for the details and commitments that projects and folks have been waiting for around the province. Community Infrastructure Fund was supposed to increase in funding. It was supposed to triple. The Ford government cut the Community Infrastructure Fund by $100 million per year and delayed infrastructure funding for municipalities under the federal provincial Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. We heard it at Roma. Municipalities have to know where they stand and what they should be able to expect. And this government canceled promised gas tax program funding for municipal transit. The Municipal Partnership Fund was recently cut again. It was $510 million in 2018, then got cut to $505 million last year, and is being cut again to $500 million this year. This government, interestingly, has publicly sought applause for not cutting it again in 2021. Doing more with less is not how municipalities make plans or build their communities, and to me that doesn't sound like partnership. The Connecting Links program is a program to help municipalities pay for their maintenance of provincial highways that used to be 100% a provincial responsibility. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. And I've been hearing it from northern communities that the Connecting Links program should be changed. The cost of maintaining those highways is downloaded down to municipalities which don't have the monies to handle that. I've heard that they should either start uploading some of these highways or increase the funding to the Connecting Link program substantially. In the case of Timmins, the main Highway 101 runs through the municipality, which is now a 4-lane highway about 20 kilometers long. To bring that road to current provincial standards would cost about $130 million, and they can only afford maybe $3 or $4 million a year. These are conversations that have to be had with the government because we have to grow, we have to move forward. In June of 2019, Moody's published a report revealing that provincial cuts and policy changes, including cuts to public health agencies, planned gas tax funding, paramedic services, childcare, and early years programs will leave municipalities more than $2 billion, quote, worse off over the next 10 years. And the impact on municipalities will be $300 million alone in 2020. Okay, so I have pointed out some of the problems. Well, unfortunately, there could have been money to invest in these programs, but we've watched this government sink a lot of money where it never should have. The Conservatives have spent $30 million taking the federal government to court on carbon pricing. It has cost $103 million US, so 137 million plus or minus Canadian on the Avista deal, money that was set on fire for no reason except for the government's meddling. They have so far lost $230 million ripping down windmills and ripping up contracts, and that amount is growing, and it's on its way reportedly to $1 billion. And I don't know about you, but that is real money, and that that money could have been spent on infrastructure and community priorities. I think that all of us in this room have the job to advocate, of course, for your communities, but for the whole province and for that accountability, and to ensure that this is a government that makes choices in the best interest of all Ontarians. Municipalities need to make plans. We heard it at AMO and we've heard it at Roma. Under review isn't good enough. All of you need to know how to plan. You have to be able to plan not just year to year, but long term. And these long-term projects require long-range planning. And they are expensive and they are complicated. Major infrastructure and transportation projects take a lot of effort to coordinate with a lot of expertise and money. Right now we're debating Bill 171. It's the Building Transit Faster Act. And the government says it's about streamlining the process. But as we're hearing from agencies like the TTC and public utilities, it could be more like steamrolling the process. The bill is limited to the 4 major transit projects in Toronto, and that may or may not seem relevant, but it is still worth understanding. It is a very heavy-handed approach. It outlines how Metrolinx or the minister can bypass collaboration and process. The government's priority projects trump any local project, completed or in the works. The government can overrule other projects and cause municipalities to cover costs of moving infrastructure. Just imagine that for a moment. It doesn't offer any compensation, but it does say that municipalities would have to cover those costs or costs of changes to agreements or project commitments and any court costs resulting from disagreements with the government. So if you don't live in Toronto, I guess it doesn't apply? Well, maybe. It's a template that has been created to deal with municipal problems, roadblocks, and projects. So some of the stakeholders who are concerned have flagged that these problems could be avoided entirely if the province makes the effort to plan and communicate with municipalities. And that has been a constant message since the election, that collaboration and honest communication are key. It is a worrying framework, though, to imagine if the planning doesn't happen in the first place. So in Oshawa and Durham region, we are looking forward to an extension of train service to Bowmanville, finally going beyond Oshawa. But we have to wonder if this framework is waiting to bully us to fix problems down the road, or optimistically and hopefully, the province will pick up the phone and call public utilities and folks to find out about projects that might be in the way now or in the works in the future, to work out a plan together to build the infrastructure, roads and travel pathways that our region so desperately needs. So it speaks to respect for municipal expertise and priorities. We will continue to advocate alongside all of Ontario's municipalities for consultation and involvement. And I would encourage you to keep eyes on Bill 171. And if you've got a local MPP, which I know you do, to make sure that you have that connection with them if you have concerns. All governments need to work together to be able to support our communities and thereby our province. They aren't separate. Ontario is its communities. It shouldn't be partisan. It should be about neighborhoods and community priorities. You know your area, you know your neighbors, and you know your potential and your challenges and your land, and you know what you need to grow. For years, I have been hearing the same commitments made over and over, but I haven't seen them delivered. You know your priorities, so does this government. They have been hearing them for years, and they have been consistent. I mentioned that I sat across the different ministers at committee. Well, again, this government didn't release the Northern or Southern Highways program. I literally begged at Estimates Committee on behalf of planners and contractors across the province for them to release what they call these public-facing documents. Communities have the right to know what is on the road ahead, what is coming, and what didn't make the list. The ministry folks made it clear that they know what their priorities are. And they told me that they don't need to have public-facing documents because they internally know what their plans are. I asked about specific community projects, about Highways 3 in Essex and 69 in Sudbury, about Highways 11 and 17 and 7, about transportation plans and infrastructure promises. I can repeat what was promised, but you have already heard it. I would invite you to look up the discussion with the minister during Estimates Committee. It would be quite educational, but likely frustrating. And if you would like to email my office with your local priorities, I would be very glad to hear from you. I'm committed to supporting communities across the province, and that's a real offer So if you'd like to find me online, you can, or email me at jfrench-qp@ndp.on.ca. So something I would like to say is that I support Vision Zero. Our party supports Vision Zero, and I believe that all of our neighbors support Vision Zero. Our roadways must be safe, and we must have a sustainable, effective, and predictable plan for winter road maintenance. Vision Zero says the acceptable number of highway fatalities is 0. Every single fatality is preventable. We have to prioritize infrastructure investment and safety priorities. Maybe you have seen that a lot of the conversation at the legislature and in the broader community, interestingly, has been about license plates that can't be seen. And I wonder now, as I'm standing here, if the government perhaps misunderstood Vision Zero and thought it was zero vision, but it is creating problems and challenges. So it was just this morning I had the opportunity to ask in the legislature about something I had read in DurhamRegion.com, that in Durham Region with the new speed enforcement cameras, that they are having challenges, that the officers who are trying to make out the word Ontario are having challenges because the font is so small. And that may be a problem that has a solution. But for different municipalities who do want to keep their roads safer, who are looking at speed enforcement, and I had heard a gentleman from the Durham Region area asking a question earlier, we shouldn't be then making it harder to enforce, to use these cameras. Anyway, something to keep in mind before you, if any of you are going to be installing cameras, you might want to get your hands on one of those plates and make sure that they work. I mentioned last time I was here, and I'll mention again, I learn a lot from our Deputy Leader, John Vantoff, who's the MPP for Timiskaming Cochrane. He's driven me around his riding so that I could understand a bit more about Northern Ontario's needs. He has called time and time again for Highway 11 and the Pan Lake Corridor to be made priorities. There are lethal sections that must be made safe no matter the weather. Drivers registered in Timiskaming, interestingly and awfully, are 4 times more likely to die on the roads than drivers registered anywhere else in the province. When Highway 11 is closed, Northern Ontario is cut off, and the twinning of sections of Highway 11 have been piecemeal, if at all. The province still hasn't even finished the section from Nipigon to Thunder Bay. During bad weather, we aren't surprised that there are terrible pileups and accidents on the 400 and on the 115. We have to have safe roads year-round. Roads have to be safe. That's what you do. That's what you know. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already advocate for. This winter, we argued in the legislature about snow clearing. Perhaps some of you followed that discussion. In my neck of the woods, we have all kinds of roads and alternate routes, and I've never realized how fortunate some of us are in that regard. But in the north and in some communities, your roads, or your road, as the case may be, is the only artery and it must be kept clear. This should not be an argument. So, as I have said, I am Jennifer French, and I serve as the critic for infrastructure, transportation, and highways. I have a lot on my plate these days. Ha ha. Perhaps you've been following the saga of the new blue license plates and how challenging the rollout has been. I mentioned that some of the cameras are having a tough time scanning them or seeing them. But as critic, it has been my responsibility to highlight the problems and push the government to ensure that folks are safe and are able to read the new plates, which weirdly has been quite a task. If you, fortunately, have not been following the story, the plates are challenging for folks to read in certain lighting conditions. They over-reflect in direct sun, headlights, and dim light, and they can't always be read with human eyes, but just with different scanning technology. As I reflect on this past week, it seems clear, unlike the license plates, that there is value in process and planning and consultation and testing. Safety has to always be the goal, and no matter how seemingly simple a project, it is worth doing well to ensure that roads and people stay safe. I don't have to sell you on the need for meaningful consultation and collaboration, but I might have to sell you on reaching out to the opposition members to support your communities and projects. I would say, as I gave you my email, I would say to you, please do make use of us. As the critic, obviously this is of interest to me because of portfolio, but every MPP in the legislature is interested in their community's growth, well-being, and safety. So please do not hesitate to pick up the phone or show up at your MPP's office, regardless of stripe, because we have to represent all of our community members, all of our drivers, all of our neighbors, and we need to hear from you. Better outcomes result from a back and forth between the government and its loyal opposition. I don't know if they would word it the same way that I just did, but it is important. And I had to push for 3 days in the legislature before the government publicly admitted that there was a problem with the unreadable license plates. They do need a push from time to time. So we live in interesting times, but we still have to build those bridges, and we have to be able to move forward with plans and with real commitment. I am pleased to serve the province as the critic for infrastructure, transportation, and highways, and I'm always pleased to be a partner with municipalities and those who want to build a better and safer province. So again, I thank you for all that you do, for all that you envision, and for including me today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And we certainly at OGRA appreciate the collaborative nature of our relationship on the Vision Zero initiative. So again, thank you very much for your time today. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our program for today. I invite you all to join us in the ballroom down the hall on your left for the Welcome Exchange Networking event. Frank Callan Company has generously sponsored this event and looks forward to treating you to some pre-dinner appetizers, refreshments, and great conversation. We also have an up-and-coming musical sensation, Jack Demarest, to entertain you. If I don't see you next door, please enjoy your evening and get out there and see Toronto and all it has to offer, and we will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Thank you all very much.